Welcome to a new episode of our ESFORIN Change Makers podcast. And I'm very happy to welcome a tech-savvy business leader with over 10 years of experience across the full value chain of the energy industry. Tim van Amstel, the CEO of E.ON One. Welcome, Tim.
It's a pleasure to be on the show and looking forward to a good conversation about how to make change.
We are happy to have you. Let us know, how did you find your way as CEO to E.ON One?
How did I find my way to E.ON One? I actually dare to say I have a long history in energy, in the energy sector, because I have been working for the larger German-based utilities. So I worked at RWE, I worked at Energy and several of their subsidiaries. And then finally, I ended up at E.ON. But I also had the pleasure of working in a lot of different parts of the value chain. So I worked on the renewable side. I worked on the grid side slightly. I worked on the renewable side, but I also worked on digital. I worked in M&A and I worked in trade. So a quite diverse situation. Eventually, E.ON was in a project called Edison, looking for, let's say, growth projects. And one of the growth projects was E.ON One. And that was more an idea. And they were searching for someone who could translate that idea into execution. So create a company out of that with the purpose of what E.ON One is doing today, selling actually software solutions externally, digitizing the energy sector. So I simply got a call where people informed me about that they thought I would be a nice candidate. And I had a really good conversation where I realized that this actually fits quite nicely with my own purpose. To bring the energy transition forward and to create a fast-growing company out of that.
Perfect. And what exactly drives you to implement a successful energy transition? And how do you think can we all manage it?
Well, I think the title of this podcast is Change Makers, and I'm not the person who likes to work on something which is more like muddling through or just continuing the status quo. I like complex challenges and like to build and create things, and I really want to make impact. And I think if you look in the energy industry, I told you before, I'm active in for a while now. Mm-hmm. If there's something really changing the whole energy landscape, it is the energy transition. Particularly if you don't focus on the whole digital side, on the software scene, I believe you can truly accelerate the energy transition by digitizing. And that really, and that is as close to what I like. I like to make change. I like to make impact. I like energy. I like the energy transition. But I also like software and combining, let's say, bits and pieces there. How to create a situation where 1 + 1 actually is 2 or 3, sorry.
Software is a very good buzzword. E.ON One is a software company within the E.ON group that wants to accelerate the digital transformation of the energy system. You just talked about yourself now, about your vision, what drives you, the energy transition and to making a change. But what is the company's vision and what do you offer your customers to finally digitalize?
From a company perspective, but actually also from a personal perspective, I believe large utilities should cooperate more, but also share more knowledge and technology. Because I believe a lot of companies are still reinventing the wheel in parallel. So there are a lot of same wheels being reinvented in parallel at multiple places. So it's definitely one of the visions of E.ON One is that by sharing more knowledge and more technology with each other, actually we can make the world much more efficient. So that is one thing. Secondly, if you look at how complex, and I think we'll get there probably later in the podcast, if you look at how complex the energy transition makes the whole energy sector, there's no way around digitalization. And these are the angles that we are trying to bring together. Let's say accelerating the energy transition with digitization and also enhancing sharing knowledge and technology between companies, between utilities. And with E.ON One, we are really trying to be a front runner there. What technology does E.ON have? How can we share that with others?
And then in your opinion, you stated what is needed, obviously digitalization, sharing knowledge, partnerships. But what are the biggest obstacles to the implementation of such as renewable energies in the grid? And how does the you mentioned digitalization come into play? And furthermore, what long-term trends do you see in the connection between digitalization and the energy industry?
I always explain the energy industry by making a bit of a simplified, let's say, a distinction between generation, consumption, and transmission and distribution. And if you look at generation, I think it's well known for hopefully most of the listeners that a big shift has already happened. We're moving to a centrally organized electricity generation system to much more decentralized and on the basis of, let's say, volatile generation. So renewables means wind and solar, and unfortunately, we don't decide when the wind blows or when the sun shines. But still, that does define when electricity is entering our grids. So I think that is a very important, let's say, element to take into account if you want to talk about obstacles. Particularly also looking at the facts and figures. I don't have them exactly by heart, but if you look at the ambition of the European Union, the amount of renewables should simply further increase significantly. I think it should almost like, let's say, double compared to, let's say, the target or the binding targets that the European Union has. So I think so. But how to deal with that without sacrificing the security of supply? Right? I think I would say that is one important obstacle to tackle. And if you then look at more on the consumption side or on the retail side, one big trend is electrification. Or maybe let's start with a personal example. I have an electric car, which I charge for the majority of time at home. Mm-hmm. I also have PV on my roof, so I produce my own electricity. I do live in the Netherlands, so we still have a so-called netting scheme, mm-hmm. which as a result, for me, there's no incentive yet to buy a battery at home to store my own electricity, but I'm reconsidering that more and more and more. And it's almost the time there where I also will buy a battery to store my energy at home. But if you look at me, myself, and I also have a heat pump. A hybrid heat pump, though, to be specific. But if you look at me, I'm already the example of electrification of myself. And this is another important trend that we are seeing. The whole, let's say, retail side it's moving more and more towards, let's say, electrification, which is a way of decarbonization, because it's much easier to produce electricity without carbon in that sense. So I think that is an important, let's say, change. But the so-called, initially called consumers, were initially then called prosumers, and we now actually prefer to call them flexumers. But this trend in itself brings additional challenges, or back to your question, obstacles, how to deal with the complete different behavior of the end users. And then there is transmission, distribution, which is in the middle and needs to deal with these huge trends, right? So generation from central to decentral and volatile, just moving up and down, wherever the wind is there, whether the solar is there. And then let's say the offtake side, the consumer side, who electrifies and in a complete different way. And the grid in between needs to manage that. That's a very complicated part. On top of the additional connections you need to make, you need to connect all new assets to the grid, or all new households that need a higher amount of capacity for their homes also need to be connected. So by simply going through the value chain and explaining multiple challenges, if you all bring that together, in itself is a huge obstacle. So this energy transition, trying to make it tangible, there are a lot of challenges out there.
Yeah, and electrification, transmission, distribution, and you also mentioned volatility, of course. I think kind of refer to flexibility. And I think I would love to talk more about that topic, not only because our company, it's our company's favorite topic, but rather because your parent company has the claim flex to the max, that the flexibility potential must be leveraged for a successful energy transition. How do you see the role of digital solutions, such as the intelligent grid platform, for the future stability and flexibility of electricity grids?
Flex to the max. I still like that word a lot. And I guess maybe even at ESFORIN, you could use that as well, because it fits also nicely to what you are doing. But I think the challenge simply lies also what I explained earlier in continuously, dynamically managing supply and demand, matching supply and demand. I think that is the challenge. And this challenge became so much more complicated. It's much more decentral. So even on a more granular level, with higher volumes, higher amounts, you really need to manage that. And this is really complex. So in short, there's no way around doing that without digitization, because you always need to have electricity, right? The security of supply is something we are all used to and would love to continue to have. And when things truly become so complex for human beings to handle it, this is where I normally start looking into the software space, and then talk about digitization. And I think the trends in itself, the ones that I at least recall, also tell a lot, right? I recall that for the difference between, like, say, the maximum and the minimum solar generation during one single day, right? Mm-hmm. That just like the so-called swings, I recall that was 60 gigawatts in 2020, and that now will further increase to 170 gigawatts in 2030. And to be even more simple, what does it mean? That means during one single day, the effect of changing solar generation is like shutting down 170 nuclear power plants. And then somehow adapting the consumption to these 170 nuclear power plants that shut down is quite complicated. And you need to do that on a super granular level all across Europe with all of the interconnections. And the only way of doing that is digitization. And then coming back to the other part of the question, so we have actually a scale-up in our portfolio called Envelio. Envelio has built a digital twin of the low voltage distribution grid, and they actually allow to be able to dynamically calculate which electricity flows where into the grid on this low voltage level. And this is, from my point of view, really a cornerstone, a must-have if you talk about this energy transition. You need to be able to monitor which electricity flows where dynamically in order to allow to adjust for that, continuously matching this supply and demand. And one of the issues that we saw 5 years ago is that a lot of, let's say, grid operators didn't fully digitize yet, and they had no visibility on what was happening on the low voltage grid. And if you don't have the visibility, how can you then actually play the game of continuously matching supply and demand on such a granular level? So therefore, we believe that solutions like Envelio, which is a software as a service solution, we did a strategic investment as E.ON One into Envelio. We're not keeping it for E.ON only, but it's being rolled out now across Europe and even in the US. And that is one important puzzle piece, from my point of view, that you really need for this energy transition. Without knowing what happens, you cannot steer, you cannot adapt and adjust.
And obviously, as you mentioned, the solar production and the renewables that like to be integrated into that complicated network, flexibility obviously has a great impact on not the flexibility marketing, or the volatility obviously has a great impact on power prices and the integration of the renewables, grid stability, and so on. So thus, where do you see energy markets in Germany and in Europe in 5 years regarding these developments?
Yeah, I think that the flexibility part simply becomes even more crucial, because if you look at the trends, the amount of renewable generation will significantly go up, but also there will be more and more electrification happened, right? More heat pumps installed, more electric vehicles, more charge points. So actually the need of itself is just going up and up and up. So I would even say without digitalization, simply this energy transition cannot happen. Because in a lot of situations, people look at the whole situation quite statically. If you want to connect a new asset to the grid, it's being calculated through, like on a very static way. Does the grid have overall throughout the whole year capacity to be connected or not? In this new world of so much fluctuation, you need to even dynamically look into that. It could mean, and I've saw it now happening in the Netherlands, There were new renewable projects or even industries that tried to connect to the grid. There was no grid connection available throughout the whole year because normally you get like a firm connection request. But they did state you could get a grid connection, but then you're not allowed to use it within these hours, on these days, in these periods. So that is already a bit of a trend toward a more dynamic grid connection, which I think will become the trend. And as a result of that, a lot of actually end users that are using electricity also need to be more dynamic. And you need digital tools. You need to be able to adapt to the situation on the grid in order to assure that we continuously have the security of supply.
And digital tools are something that, E.ON One can offer to conquer the challenges of the energy transition. And so I'd love to talk a little about more E.ON One and your focus on the digital energy transition, as you often talk about so-called ecosystems in the energy sector and mentioned this in your introduction of E.ON One. How important is collaboration with startups and partners for your company?
Yeah, I think that it is crucial because indeed we generally talk about an ecosystem of companies, and E.ON One is actually, we're building our own software. We are taking strategic positions into start and scale ups, but we also partner with leading technology players without taking shares into them. So, and by doing that, we are creating an ecosystem of companies where we try to work together with. But we are quite open for any type of cooperation. So therefore, this collaboration for me and for us is key. I have the pleasure of working with so many entrepreneurs, and what does make them unique? If the business model doesn't work, they just shift and find something new because they truly are only interested in solving a problem. Because if you're solving a true problem, this is when your company gets traction and when your company grows. And this is one of the skills I appreciate so much of talking to so many start and scale ups and entrepreneurs. They'll find the problems and they'll adapt to it. They even can completely transform the whole business around for a new problem, which is even bigger to solve. So this collaboration is key. And without entrepreneurs, the biggest problems are not solved.
And how do you combine this? Yeah, you also mentioned, for instance, Envelio as a startup, a company. How do you combine this world of startups or startup culture with an established energy group? Does that actually work? Because you just said those companies can adapt quickly to problems or change their complete business model if necessary. But I would reckon that's for such a huge group as E.ON not necessarily possible.
Yeah, I think exactly what you just described is the role of E.ON One. E.ON One is actually in the middle. So we are on the one hand part of the larger E.ON organization, and we are very close to the entrepreneurs, the start and scale ups. And we really try to, let's say, make sure we are using the best of both worlds. So because a large energy group also had a lot of strengths, right? Because you can imagine that all of the, let's say, the policies that are applied are quite strict in that sense, right? Talking about cybersecurity, but also technology governance, we are super strict because everything we do should be scalable, and we cannot risk that for a few million customers, something does not work. Secondly, as a large group, you also have an international presence. So that also helps a lot. We have people eventually everywhere, or indirectly, we can be in touch with anybody. And of course, there's a brand. We are a strong, well, depends on whether you have a positive or a negative connotation, but we have a strong brand, which can or could work. And then if you look at the start and scale ups, they're much faster, closer to the market, much more agile, adapt and adjust. And they also are able to attract a lot of talent, because if you look at the tech business, people don't choose for salary anymore. They generally choose for purpose and making an impact. And then having, let's say, the start and scale ups. One example, I know that for companies like Gridix, they're now with a few hundred people, but they have like 10,000s of people applying for a role in their organization. So that tells a little bit about, let's say, how strong their brand or their organization is. People want to work there for their purpose, that have the feeling that they directly contribute and make a tangible impact. So yeah, we are trying to combine that through E.ON One. If E.ON is, let's say, having difficulties to pay one of our startups in time, then E.ON One also plays that role. So we really try to smoothen things and bring best of both worlds together.
As you focus as well on, obviously digital transition, and it's a broad topic, especially artificial intelligence is also mentioned as a possible change maker. What role does AI play in the optimization of networks or the introduction of new services, besides being the connection between the startups and the established energy group?
I think it's a bit of an overall statement, but definitely AI plays a big role. It's now a big trend. Not everybody becomes aware of it, but it has been part of actually a lot of our products and a lot of our technology before, right? Being able to predict and know what is happening in the grid where, that in itself is not something that's done by human beings, but by very sophisticated, well thought through software. And if you then talk about AI, actually, maybe a more tangible example I can use is one of the new products that E.ON One has been, let's say, is sharing with the market. It's a solution called One Voice, and One Voice is a voice bot solution. What does that mean? Anybody that has and owns a call center is dealing with the same issues. It's hard to find new people to work in a call center. Secondly, people always call at the same time, peaking times. And you cannot just then have, 300 people more working in your call center because of an issue. Concrete example, generally people call on Mondays. Why? They check the invoice throughout the weekend, and on Mondays they call during office hours. Very simple. Or if there's a change in regulation and, for example, an energy supplier sends a letter to their customers, they all start calling after they receive the letter because something is unclear or they have an additional question. So there's always peak times. And the beauty is that a lot of these calls can simply be solved with relatively simple answers. People still like to call the call center, also me, because some people have quite bad experiences with chatbots. Depends on the chatbot, of course, but people still like to call. The technology of doing actually proper conversation with a bot is so advanced, but not very much applied yet. So we are partnering with a company called Paloa. This is actually a scale-up, and this is a fully AI infused solution because, you need AI to have a proper conversation. You can actually talk about anything, and if you then see the results, it's truly astonishing. And it can actually work in any language. But the pity is it's not really wide applied yet. So we always say that the technology is not the bottleneck, but whether the newest technology is applied, that is the bottleneck. So that's more in culture and adaptability. So that's one solution. And I think they actually have a few more, but of course, AI is a bit of a buzzword, but in our case, it's through all of our solutions, or maybe one more. We have a predictive maintenance platform now for charge station or charge point operators. With this platform on the base of AI, you can simply predict when a charging station will fail. Because, for example, you'll see the voltage decreasing over a period of time, and you already have the trends from the last years when the voltage decreases, when it will break down. So you can predict when it will stop operating. And then you can already, let's say, send a technician there upfront or schedule that upfront, since you do know when it will fail. And as a result of that, the charge point stations availability is much more up there. And their simply availability increases, which is good also for the charge point operator. But again, an example of something which is impossible without AI.
It's really interesting, especially the first one, the One Voice example, because sometimes I think same with our company is that it's not about that there are not the tools or the services available. Sometimes it's about the trust or to implement it or to think, to have as we are talking about change making, to also change a way of viewing things, such as using the available flexibility or not. And I could imagine that it's also for the customers that if they don't know it's artificial intelligence, it's probably easier for them to adapt to those core centers.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe to build upon that, and also back to your earlier question, there we do combine, let's say, the strength of being part of a large E.ON group, and let's say the technology uniqueness of certain scale-ups, right? So first, of course, E.ON starts using it themselves. So this One Voice solution for VoiceBot is used in our retail and also will be used in our grid segment, because also people call grid operators. Actually, a lot of people call the grid operator while they try to call the energy supplier. So that can already be solved. Very specific example. But because we as E.ON are implementing it, if you then go to another energy supplier, that actually also creates some trust, because that is the first question we as E.ON One always get. Are you also using it in E.ON? And if the answer is no, then it's a hard conversation. And then indeed, you won't get the trust you need for a really cool, new, groundbreaking technology.
Absolutely. What would you do to optimize besides one voice, the existing infrastructure, and to retrofit it for the energy transition? Because it's not always possible to have new infrastructure, or for example, the expansion of renewables is not always possible. What else can you offer to solve that?
Yeah, it does come down to indeed where does the bottleneck come from. I think so. We also as E.ON One, we focus on what we call retrofit solutions. If you talk about the energy grid, the distribution grid, I talked about how to digitize these. And a substation, which actually converts the medium voltage to the low voltage, is in a majority of cases not digital. And as a result of that, and you see that actually in every single country across Europe, as a result of that, you don't know exactly what is happening where into the grid. So then you can do two things. Either you completely replace it by a brand new, relatively high expensive digital substation, or you retrofit it. And this retrofit is something we as E.ON One also do. So it's like a relatively simple hardware component, which allows you to digitize an existing substation. And by doing that, you simply get the data, which is in the substation, out and bring it into the cloud. On the base of that data, that is then brought to the cloud, a grid operator knows what exactly happens where at what transformer station. So this is another way how we look into that, because you need to know, you need to measure, you need to have sensors out there to see exactly what happens where, due to this, what we discussed earlier, much more complex energy system. So yeah, I think that is another example of solutions we look into. How to faster get monitoring of any energy asset online.
How to get faster to the next trend, or to successfully implement the energy transition is, I think, something we are all thriving for. And so I'm also very curious, what do you plan in the future, let's say in the next 10 years, to accelerate the transformation process in the energy sector? For instance, are there any products or services that can be expected from you?
I think, first of all, I think we are relatively strong on the grid area, because E.ON is quite a big player in the distribution grid domain. So and with Envelio, they are really conquering the European or even the US market with their new digital twin of the grid. So we really want to strengthen that. And how can we further accelerate it? And there are more solutions related or actually could enhance their solution. So we look even broader into staying this grid software champion and further expanding that position. I think that is one important piece. And then if you look at the whole smart energy management category, I think Gridix is also doing a really good job with the white label platform solutions, enabling the future energy home or home energy management system. And therefore, we also want to further expand, let's say, our key position, because eventually it does come down to that we need to be able to manage also the energy within a household better. So the behind the meter energy management game and play, and fully integrated it more into the energy market. So this is where another area where we really want to strengthen, want to further, let's say, build out. But I think it's also fair to say that there are a lot of things out there unknown, which I don't have an idea about yet, that we will play in that field. Because if you would have asked me 2 years ago about customer interaction and what the role of E.ON One would be, I would not have mentioned one voice, this voice bot solution, because that simply came out of the team who's continuously scouting for the new trends, for the new cool start and scale ups, for the new digital products. And they came back with actually what we call a white spot. So actually, this is also the beauty of what we are doing. It is not fully defined yet. So I'm 100% sure there will be more white spot coming up. And then in 5 years' time, we have another conversation again there, and then I'll tell you, there's one I didn't see coming, and went really big, and is really now contributing to this new energy world.
Perfect. But we cannot foresight, but how about looking back and what would you say was so far your favorite change maker? Who do you admire for for his or her groundbreaking spirit or approach?
If you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have mentioned Elon Musk, but it's a bit of a controversial, let's say, topic now. But what I at least appreciate in the entrepreneur was the engineering approach to things and making the impossible possible. So in that sense, I think that overall I appreciate into any entrepreneur. But what I think was also, maybe if you look at the last 12 months, who I listened to, who I truly found inspiring, Nandan Nilekani, he's the founder of Infosys. I'm not sure whether you ever heard about them. And Infosys is this giant from India. It's a software service company. As he's one of the founders. And he was actually a keynote speaker at one of the E.ON events, and he explained what type of changes he brought. And he actually, which I never knew, he quitted his job at Infosys because he was asked by the Indian government whether he could accelerate the digitization journey of the country. And he gave us an example, what he did, what impact he created, and how many people he simply gave access to internet. And as a result of that, access to opening bank accounts and being part of the society, pro bono, quitting his job at Infosys. I truly believe that it was very much inspiring. So that specific example, I really look back to him, to a big change maker who made a huge impact without probably a lot of people even knowing about that.
Wow, thank you very much. Very inspiring. I did not actually hear about him, but it's a shame, I must admit. And thank you for sharing. And thank you very much for this interesting interview about E.ON One, about yourself, and of course the energy transition. And and I very much hope that also our dear listeners enjoyed this episode. And if so, we would be delighted if you subscribe to our ESFORIN Change Makers podcast. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for the great interview.